Namco was no stranger to bringing shoot-em-ups to the PC Engine. Some, like Barunba and Xevious Foudrout Saga, were only mediocre, but others like Galaga 88 shone quite brightly. Dragon Spirit was one such game, with an upgradable dragon and fantasy setting. It even saw a North American release. However, it wasn't as great as it maybe could have been. Some iffy sprites, an enormous unforgiving hitbox, and a lack of two-player co-op meant that as good as it was, there was a lot of room for improvement. Improvement that would come to pass in 1990. Dragon Saber is basically everything you'd want in a sequel. Better visuals, better control, better mechanics, better sound, better everything. It takes the good of Dragon Spirit and bumps it up to the level of awesome.
Released for the PC Engine in 1991 as a slightly scaled-down port of the arcade original, Dragon Saber sure does a lot of great things to improve on the Dragon Spirit legacy. The most welcome addition is the two-player mode, which allows for a buddy to get in on the action, but a number of enhancements also makes this the game to play if you even only sort of like the 1988 original, and they are many. So let's take a closer look.
Namco was famous for expanding the bounds by which shooting games were played as far back as 1982 with its breakout arcade hit Xevious. Like Xevious, Dragon Spirit and Dragon Saber allow for attacking both airborne and ground-based enemies. Pressing the 2 button will fire a volley of air-to-air shots. If the button is left unpressed though, a charge shot can be fired once the button is pressed again after a few seconds. Meanwhile, the 1 button will fire a salvo of death towards the ground. This is not only handy for defeating enemies, but also hatching eggs to collect power-ups and abilities.
Like Dragon Spirit, the Dragon's fire attack can be upgraded by collecting orange hexagram pickups. However, this process is streamlined quite a bit. Instead of 3 pickups to gain a firepower level, only 1 is needed to progress a level, to a maximum level of 3. This also applies to any of the other dragon types that you can change into as well, making for a much more flexible game.
The addition of new non-random dragon types is a welcome feature. Whereas in Dragon Spirit, the abilities dropped were randomized from flashing enemies, new egg colors are now found throughout the game that grant new abilities. Each of these new dragon types have a charge ability as well, some of which can be absurdly powerful. Of these types are the Fire Dragon and its Phoenix Breath, the Spark Dragon with an aerial screen-clearing special attack, and the Chill Dragon, complete with homing shots. But, as with Dragon Spirit, there is one special dragon type that can be obtained at random from flashing enemies, the Small Dragon. Additionally, bonus points, speed, and shields can also be obtained.
Control-wise, Dragon Saber is pretty forgiving, with a solid movement rate and a reduced hitbox, allowing for greater freedom of movement and the ability to better dodge some of the tighter attack waves you'll face. All in all, it makes for a pretty good gameplay experience, though the difficulty is one to be reckoned with. The default 3 lives makes for a really hard playthrough, especially in some of the later stages.
The scoring in Dragon Saber is very basic, and doesn't do too much other than say, yep, you scored a bunch of points. In fact, it has nothing to do with either credits or extends. In the case of extends though, Dragon Saber, like Dragon Spirit before it, does things a little differently.
Every now and again a heart icon will appear at random as you defeat flashing enemies. Collecting this will grant the player an egg, but simply collecting one isn't enough for an extend. 3 of them are required to hatch the egg into an extra life. This can happen quickly or not at all, but it's still a pretty neat way to go about getting another chance at beating the game.
Dragon Saber's story is pretty simple. An evil sorcerer is threatening the world, and Goddess Alia grants Hue and Celia a magic saber, granting them the power to transform into mighty dragons to save the Earth from destruction. While the opening attract mode from the arcade version is missing, it's more or less outlined in the book. In the arcades, Dragon Saber had an incredible presentation for 1990 with intense visuals and unbelievable sound. Of course, the PC Engine couldn't hope to match the arcade's raw power, but still manages to impress.
Visually, Dragon Saber is pretty strong compared to the other games at the time of its release, though not exceptional. There isn't a lot of multi-layer scrolling to speak of, and some of the patterns used aren't especially natural. But it more or less fixes everything that was wrong with Dragon Spirit's odd mystery creature sprites with clean, well-defined creatures.
One of the biggest aspects of Dragon Saber's presentation is its sound. While the OST and sound effects are not nearly as good as its arcade counterpart, and believe me, Dragon Saber Arcade has one of my favorite soundtracks ever. Shinji Hosoi's musical stylings are still very faithfully executed on the PC Engine, despite only being a HuCard game running off of inferior FM synth. Despite this though, if you've got a good set of headphones, the bass in this music is quite satisfying.
Effects aren't too overbearing either. Nothing special, but nothing annoying either. It makes for a listening experience that is equal parts snappy and catchy without too much in the way of sound effects drowning out the good stuff. So, when it all comes together, how does Dragon Saber stack up? Let's take a look.
Smooth control really makes Dragon Saber easy to pick up and play.
A much smaller hitbox than the one found in Dragon Spirit allows for some sick dodges.
Dragon Saber sure doesn't pull its punches, yet remains quite playable.
This game is going to kick your ass, especially in the final stage.
At 9 stages, there's a lot to play through here, so long as you've got the time to see it through to the end.
To me, it was a smidge too long, even with the 8th stage being a power-up heavy cakewalk corridor with no boss.
Upgraded visuals are bright and colorful and well defined, but some of the ground patterns are a little too small though, and look far too repetitive, especially compared to later levels.
Despite the upgraded visuals from its predecessor, Dragon Saber can still leave you scratching your head sometimes trying to figure out what the heck you're looking at.
The epic Shinji Hosoi soundtrack remains more or less intact with its transition from arcade to HuCard. It even has satisfying bass.
The music is catchy, and the sound effects are spot on.
Dragon Saber does everything right as far as sequels go. A refined power-up system, reduced hitbox, and 2-player co-op support are perfect additions to a solid concept.
The refined power-up system is really what makes this game shine, with a satisfying progression that doesn't feel too difficult or lengthy.
Dragon Saber is a game I wish I had better access to earlier on. While I'd love to have the arcade rendition at some point, the PC Engine version of this classic dragon-based shooter satisfies my craving very well, to say the least. Dragon Saber gets a 4 out of 5. Getting a copy of Dragon Saber isn't particularly hard or costly if you have the right connections. On the PC Engine, copies often go for $25 or less, with the exception of course for brand new sealed copies. As with all PC Engine HuCards, it is region locked. The PlayStation has a much costlier alternative via the Encore disc of the Namco Museum, which again is Japan only. This will get you the arcade version though. And finally, if you have access to a Japanese Wii, both the PC Engine and arcade version of Dragon Saber can be obtained for 600 and 800 Wii points respectively. No matter the method you get this game though, if you dug Dragon Spirit, this is definitely the game you want to play.